Whether or not internet addiction is a disease, most people, particularly those who share Wan Su's worldview, would agree it is. What person hasn't heard about internet addiction? It was, however, the ideal excuse for a child they couldn't manage for the parents who sent their children here. Even if they are irresponsible, aren't others watching out for them? And didn't this school exist to make money in the first place? Then it goes without saying that those who are ineffective should be held accountable for their conduct. At least, that's what most people would believe. This wreck of a school was erected by the person standing in front of Ceirin. In reaction to Xiao Qingrong's scathing remark, Wan Su squinted. His heart was racing with fear. He's been experiencing nightmares lately. He had dreams about the kids who were reprimanded and tormented by the instructors. In his dream, those young individuals with scars kept arriving. They accused him repeatedly, but he thought it wasn't his fault. He wasn't the one who harmed or murdered them. The children's parents also sent them in. Why would they have been put here in the first place if they weren't able to educate still children? After all, the school's only responsibility was to instruct and discipline them. No, it's not because of me, it's because they were disobedient. They were punished for disobedience. Could you please let me go? Could you please let me go? He pleaded loudly, his eyes bulging with fear. He shut his hand and trembled on the floor, but he couldn't move without being pressed by the two children. Even after all this time, you still avoid responsibility? If you didn't create this school, why would there be so many children here? During its 21 years of existence, this school received so many children. How did you treat them? Do you still feel comfortable with all the money you got from your parents? Did you ever think you would be in this kind of situation, being the victim? The real executioner was never the knife maker. Although Wan Su's hand was not contaminated, he was the one who controlled countless knives, so Xiao Qingrong couldn't let him go. Standing up from the ground, Xiao Qingrong spoke again. Take him with me to the freezer. The freezer was a really good place to store chemicals. It was almost impossible to find one, and it also allowed him to do some experiments. Qingrong had bought a lot of chemicals. He left most of them in this storage area. There, he was going to have some fun with Wan Su and make him experience the children's pain. Yang Fan and Qiyu were both aware that Xiao Qingrong had placed a large number of chemicals in the freezer. Despite not knowing what it was, they believed in him and did not have any reservations about him. After that, they dragged Wan Su off the floor and followed Qingrong to the freezer. Wan Su, in their hearts, was likewise an unpardonable person. Although they have just recently discovered that many more pupils have attended the school since its inception, what they have witnessed in the last few years is only the tip of the iceberg. Nobody knew what type of school this was better than them, and the one who built it was none other than him. Don't kill me. Don't kill me, please. Don't kill me, please. Wan Su was taken aback by Qingrong's statements. He struggled valiantly, but he still pulled ahead, and his frantic shouts were heard by others in the confinement chamber. Teachers and instructors became even more terrified after seeing those images. It reminded them of how insane the children were. They were unstoppable now. Their deaths seemed to be near, and they dared not think about who would be next. They regretted it for a time, wondering why they worked here, but their remorse was now futile. While screaming, Wan Su thought if he ever came out alive, he would not be so greedy, not for money or power, and he regretted mistreating the children. But now that it was too late, he wouldn't be able to pay his debt. Wan Su was soon brought to the freezer. When Xiao Qingrong opened the door, frigid air poured in, making them shiver. Wan Su became even more terrified. He had escaped with his life countless times throughout his life, but after being imprisoned for 7 days, his limbs were weak, and he could not oppose Yang Fan and Qiyu. He was terrified of his inability to flee. With little energy, he couldn't. Xiao Qingrong likes the feel of the freezer. Wan Su was pulled in behind him as he walked in. He was then forced in, and as he looked around uneasily, he noticed frozen statues. didn't they seem like humans? All of a sudden, Wan Su's legs softened. Even though Yang Fan and Chi Yu were holding him together, he couldn't stop shaking. It can be seen how horrible the scene was. He was so scared to death that he even pissed his pants. Yang Fan and Chi Yu also saw what was on the ground. They were a little surprised. They didn't know why Qingrong bought those chemicals, but now they knew after seeing the corpses made out of some strange substance, presumably chemicals. Even Yang Fan and Chi Yu were stunned by the sight, not to mention Wan Su, who knew what was going to happen to him. Okay, leave him here, you two go out first. Be sure to close the door and leave a gap. Wait outside the door for me. Xiao Qingrong didn't want them to come into contact with the chemicals. After all, this wasn't anything like medicine and was not at all safe. It was very toxic. Yang Fan and Chi Yu nodded and released him. Wan Su, whose body had originally gone soft, fell directly to the ground. The cold ground made him numb and helpless as Xiao Qingrong's devilish eyes desperately tried to grab Yang Fan's leg. Don't go, take me away with you. Please take me away. Don't leave me to this murderer, please. Wan Su saw Xiao Qingrong as a murderer, otherwise, how could he be so unaffected in the face of such a horrific corpse? Yang Fan, on the other hand, sneered while kicking Wan Su's hand away. Murderer? Who is the true assassin? Do you have any suggestions? He brought Chi Yu out after speaking, and the two closed the door, leaving a space, and stood outside. They had no idea what Xiao Qingrong would do to the principal, but the principal would not let him escape. Only Xiao Qingrong and Wan Su were left in the freezer, along with the remaining corpses, of course. Wan Zusser watched Xiao Qingrong stand there calmly. He already knew that no matter how much he begged at this time, it wouldn't have an effect. He could only try to fight. He worked hard to adjust his posture and decided to wait for a while before rushing toward Xiao Qingrong. Unfortunately for him, even with Qingrong's thin physique, he stood no chance. After falling on the floor, he looked up, and Qingrong laughed at him. It wasn't much work in Qingrong's case. Every move was within Qingrong's sight, whether it was his fear or his motivation to win. Qingrong reached out and took out a scalpel from his left pocket. It was different from the previous scalpel. This one was 20 centimeters long and still as sharp as the others. When Wan Su saw the scalpel, he lost hope and didn't dare to move. The silver scalpel spun so eloquently in his hand. Even in such a cold environment, his fingers are still the most flexible in the world. His eyes fell on Wan Su's body, and he suddenly felt like the chemicals were kind of useless. All in all, even though it had been corroding in the freezer for a while in such a cold environment, his fingers are still the most flexible in the world. His eyes fell on Wan Su's body, and he suddenly felt like the chemicals were kind of useless. All in all, it had been corroding in the freezer for a while. What a pity. Now he had to find new uses for them. Wan Su retreated steadily, his pants soaked, as he approached him slowly. In the freezer, ice tends to go rancid quickly, and with each retreat, his fingers got colder and colder. At the time, he appeared embarrassed, with his hands and nose red. Soon, Wan Su was pushed into a corner, and with nowhere to go, he was stumped. He couldn't even fight back. Wan Su was born without much emotion, but looking into Qingrong's eyes, he felt fear consume him and decided to speak once again. I beg you, please don't kill me. I can give you all my money. My family is rich. I have tens of millions. There are even 50 million in my secret account. It's all yours, as long as you let me go. Please, please spare me. Wan Su got up and knelt on the cold floor. He slammed his head repeatedly, even though his head was bleeding and he was in pain. He couldn't care less because he needed to live. Watching this man kneel and beg, Xiao Qingrong not only did not sympathize with him but felt even more disgusted. How could his life be bought so easily with money? Could the lives of these students be trampled over so easily and silently? You can rest assured that I won't kill you. I just want you to live in the school and forever experience the pain those kids have gone through. As long as you obey, you can live well, all right? Xiao Qingrong looked at Wan Su and decided to go back and reinvestigate his accounts. After all, having 50 million more wasn't so bad. Please let me go, please let me go. Wan Su was still slamming his head, but Xiao Qingrong had no patience. Originally, he brought Wan Su over to let him experience the feeling of death, but now that Qingrong had found a new use for him, it didn't matter if he was scared or not. He called Yang Fan and Chi Yu to come in to ask them to take Wan Su away and call a cook over to the canteen. Although Yang Fan and Chi Yu didn't understand why they still obediently followed his order, Xiao Qingran was left alone in the freezer. Although the door was open, no one came over. He decided to check for spoiled chemicals, and with the scalpel in his hand, he moved toward the statue. He saw that the chemicals had formed a thin layer of ice, so he squatted down and gently cut off a piece. The chemical slowly revealed itself, at least the ones that hadn't deteriorated. It was still frozen, as with such a cold temperature, everything was stiff. 618 looked at it curiously. Although it saw the host holding the scalpel, everything else was practically red. It didn't know much about chemicals but still found them fascinating. It then actually saw the host take out a pot and throw the pieces of ice in it. Looking at the chemicals in the pot, it was both confused and curious. What are you doing, host? What's the use of these frozen chemicals? The system didn't know many things, and it didn't know what the chemicals were. It only knew that its host was proficient in using the scalpel, among other things, but it didn't expect the host to know chemistry. 618 knew that using violence to control violence wasn't a good thing, but it couldn't stop Xiao Qingrong and could only comfort itself. If the host wasn't strong, he would be abused. Well, I suddenly had a good idea. These raw materials will be quite useful. After its temperature drops, it will produce an element that makes people hallucinate. While answering 618, Xiao Qingrong continued to use his scalpel to collect the chemicals. Compared to others who didn't know much about chemical elements and their interactions, Xiao Qingrong knew very well. After all, he had been exposed to these things for a long time. The role of these raw materials was beyond most people's understanding. Oh, 618 didn't ask too much. Before it asked, it was still rejected by the host, but it should strive to be a system that the host likes. Xiao Qingrong's movement was fast. After a while, he came out of the cold storage and left. The school also has a canteen, which is mostly for the teachers and instructors. In any case, Yang Fan and Qin Yu brought over the cook to the kitchen. The woman who was brought was a woman in her 40s. She was a little scared when she saw Xiao Qingrong. Xiao Qingrong's appearance was still imprinted in her mind. To her, Xiao Qingrong was almost like a devil. Don't your instructors and the principal like to eat alone? Now I can't reduce your treatment. From today, you will cook for all the people in the confinement room. I believe you can, right? The woman quickly nodded, saying that as long as she didn't die, she was willing to do anything. Yang Fan and Chi Yu didn't understand the reason, but they didn't ask much. After the teachers and instructors were detained for 7 days, they finally ushered in their first hearty meal in the confinement room, rice and meat. Of course, this made them excited. The long-hungry instructors and teachers rushed to eat the food. They felt like the food was unprecedentedly delicious, probably because they hadn't eaten anything good lately, and so they felt that this was the most delicious food in the world. Did they eat yet? Sitting in the principal's office, Xiao Qingrong asked Chi Yu with interest. Yes, they've already eaten. Chi Yu heard Xiao Qingrong's explanation and still didn't understand what was going on, especially the crystals placed inside. He didn't understand why he still obeyed, but he did. Well then, Lele, what about your side? How are the students doing my homework? 2 days have passed. These students should also know what they should do. It was impossible to indulge in online games or social networking. Rong Lele and Tang Jiayu glanced at each other. They were both in charge of this matter. Although the students have been grouped, not everyone is talented. Many individuals were perplexed, while others figured it out and found a method. 240 pupils have begun online gaming training, and 32 students have decided to broadcast is still banned or Rang investigated. Tang Jiayu then hurriedly followed. The formal beta test of an online game named Langhu Ling begins the day after tomorrow. After 2 days of inquiry, many of the students believe that this game is quite playable. This gaming client is completely free. The items within may be gained through gameplay. For the new game, we will have the most resources. I encourage any pupils who are unsure what to do to participate in this game. Tang Jiayu was obsessed with games at the beginning. This, Jianghu Ling, was discussed with a few boys who played games. The new game was launched. Many would need gold to start. They had so many people, they were a natural studio to farm gold. In addition to earning gold, they could trade and earn about 20,000 in a day. With 2,000 people swiping gold at the same time plus the equipment drop, they could easily earn much more. Xiao Qingrong knew about the game. When he was busy making money some time ago, he saw an ad pop up that recommended this game, but he felt like these children's brains were moving pretty fast. Alright, you do that. This month will be a challenge. If our school can profit from this, you will have a brighter future, and our school will be better. I believe you all understand. Although Xiao Qingrong had no idea what was about to happen, this strategy was viable for these young people. Also, bring Tao Zi once you leave. Xiao Qingrong was more concerned with latent talent than with regular people. This year, Tao Zi was just 16 years old. He had been here since he was 13 years old, and he had endured here for 3 years. He was brought in by his stepmother and had no intention of leaving school because he lacked an ID card. They left after 4 students reported the incident at school. Tao Zi was brought over after a while. He was a pale-faced youngster who stood just 5 meters tall, which was unusual for his age. He felt uneasy when he saw Xiao Qingrong and surreptitiously clasped his hands together, not knowing why he had been summoned by the newly appointed principal. Xiao Qingrong chuckled as he saw the boy's idea. Isn't that Tao Zi? Do you believe you have what it takes? Did you learn computer language simply to open plugins?